All right, History 131, folks. What I wanted to talk about is the primary document for this chapter. If you take a look at it, you'll see it's about Mott and Stanton and the Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions. The idea is that we're going to have a meeting of the minds. We're going to have a meeting of women because there is a struggle for enfranchisement, for the women's vote, but for women's rights as well. Now, if you take a look down at the Unit 6 discussion forum, one of those discussion forums is on coverture. It's femme couvert versus femme solo. And here's the idea. This is addressing the same kind of thing. A single woman at this particular point in time, if she owns property, if she owns a business, she's going to pay taxes. But in most states, she has no say whatsoever. But once she gets married, that property, that ownership reverts to her husband. Women exist independently up until the time they're married. And when they become married, they become pretty much the property and the responsibility of the husband. And so coverture means that he absorbs her or he covers her legally. And so we start looking here about women going out and women demonstrating, and we start looking at the beginning of the women's movement, which is what this is part of. And the fact is, these women can go out and they can demonstrate, they can break the laws. And what's going to happen is they're going to be arrested. But then what's going to happen is the magistrate or the justice of the peace is going to pull their husband in and ask him why he's not controlling his wife. Because that's his legal responsibility. So I want you to take a look at that discussion. Make sure that you've looked at the section in the book because it gives you a little bit of background on it. And then I want you to go ahead and take a look at the Mott and Stanton Declaration. You have to remember a couple of things. At this point, abolition, temperance, and the right for the women's vote, the women's movement or women's rights are all very much part of this same fight at this particular point. Women have put themselves in league with temperance and abolition as well. And the idea being is they're struggling to increase the vote. If they can go ahead and link themselves with the abolition party about freeing the slaves, about enfranchising another group of people, that gives them more and a stronger portion of people willing to vote and willing to represent. But this document here, this Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions, is interesting because this particular meeting, this women's assembly, is going to cause a division because there are several different versions of this society, of this women's movement. There's different chapters and different groups are going to come together and have this meeting, but they're not going to agree. They're going to say, hey, listen, either this document is perfect or this document is a little bit too harsh or that we're asking too much. And so what you've got to do is you've got to go down and look at it. Now, number one, if you read the document, you'll see that she borrows a page out of Thomas Jefferson's book. And that's interesting to me because she takes it and there's some subtle changes and not so subtle changes in some of the words. And she also talks about women not being entitled to education. But I think if you read this, you'll see that this is written by a couple of highly educated women, in spite of the fact that women aren't allowed to go to college. What is unique about this is they take this rather hard line, and this hard line about demanding rights, this hard line about, listen, if we're not allowed to vote, well, then we're allowed to rebel because Thomas Jefferson said that. And so we're just going to go ahead and carry out the same thing because you are taxing us. You are creating laws for us, but you're not giving us any representation because our husbands aren't us. And so I want you to take a look at the document and go down and look at some of the rights and look at some of the stands. But then you also have to realize that for some, it's a very radical document. And the fact that it's so radical is going to cause a division, a split between the groups because there's going to be some people who sign it and some people don't. The other thing you have to remember is the meeting that they're at, the assembly they're at, is both men and women. And some of the men are going to go, yeah, it's one thing to respect women, it's one thing to want to vote for women, but some of the stuff is a bit outlandish. Some of the stuff is a bit far out, and so we want you to make sure that you're, taking a look at that. But some of the men are going to say, hey, listen, you're just asking way too much. Quite a few of the women are going to say, listen, This is too big of a bite for us. And so take a look at some of the things that requiring. I think Mott and Stanton have some great points. I think they're right about women being entitled to more. They're right about women being entitled to the vote. I think the problem here is the approach they use. The approach they use, if you put yourself in the time frame, and that's important, put yourself in the historical time frame and say, listen, where are women in society? What position have they been relegated to? Because a lot of this is taken in that biblical context. And if you look at the biblical context again, women don't seem to have a whole lot of rights there. So go ahead and take a peek at that. But make sure, like I said, you read up on coverture just a little bit. If you want to join in that discussion board of coverture, that's up to you. I think it's a pretty interesting concept that women exist up until the time they get married, and then they cease to legally exist. All right, I'll go ahead and turn you loose and let you get started on the document. Thank you.